When someone from the LGBTQ plus community comes to you wanting to build a family, what does that journey really look like for them today?
What's been misunderstood is it is a complex process, but it's not so complex as to be daunting, and the success rates are very high.
Trying to conceive isn't just a physical journey, it's one of the most mentally and emotionally demanding experiences a couple can go through. And it's time we start talking about all of it. Hi, I'm Denise Erez, your fertility godmother, and this show is for the woman who wants to optimize their health, who is trying to conceive and wants real, honest support, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, without the overwhelm. Because this journey isn't just about getting pregnant. It's about who you become through it. And you don't have to navigate it alone. So take a deep breath. You're in the right place. Let's do this together. And welcome to the Fertility Godmother Show. Hi, welcome to the Fertility Godmother Show. Today, I'm really excited to be joined by Dr. Guarnaccia, a very respected, board-certified reproductive chronologist who has helped countless individuals and couples navigate the path to parenthood, including those in the LGBTQ plus community. His work goes beyond the clinical side of fertility, supporting patients through a process that is often quite complex, emotional, and deeply personal. This is such an important conversation, and I'm so grateful that you're here today. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Guarnaccia, and welcome.
Well, thank you for having me. So just once again, here I am at New England Fertility Institute in Stamford, Connecticut, where we've been since Dr. Gad Levy started the practice about 40 years ago. And our specialization is actively working with LGBTQ plus couples and also single parents by choice to work with them to achieve their goals for family building. So thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. All right, so let me start here. When someone from the LGBTQ plus community comes to you wanting to build a family, what does that journey really look like for them today?
Well, I think we have to parse it out. So we have a vast number of both same-sex male clients and same-sex female couples. So those two pathways differ in the sense that for a lot of the same-sex female couples, their goal would be to start a family using either donor sperm from an anonymous sperm bank, or if they come with a known sperm donor, that would be part of the initial consultation so that I could ascertain from them, number one, what does their family look like to them and how do they want to achieve that? In some same-sex female couples, one of the partners will be identified as the person who wants to carry the pregnancy, or they'll each want to carry a pregnancy at different times or in tandem, and knowing that they're either using anonymous donor sperm or once again, if they have a known sperm donor. So that course of treatment is down one pathway. Now, for the same-sex male couples or single males by choice, we would have to work with them to ascertain or find them an egg donor, an anonymous or a known egg donor. Now, we here in New England Fertility have our own group of egg donors, anonymous egg donors. Or they may work with an outside agency to provide them with an egg donor. Now, in most situations, the eggs that donor produces as part of the IVF process will be fertilized with the sperm of both partners, both male partners. That requires workup and testing ahead of time. But just for a global overview, the donor would go through an egg extraction. She would go through the IVF process. Eggs would be produced. Here at New England Fertility, they would be extracted in our operating room, or retrieved, we call it. And then the eggs would be fertilized with both partners' sperm in a 50-50 split, and embryos would be produced. Those embryos would then be grown, tested, and frozen. Then, as part of the second part of what a male couple would need to do, they would need to ascertain a gestational carrier or a surrogate. Both terms are used interchangeably. Once they've gotten a surrogate from an outside agency, we would then work with that surrogate to prep her uterus to receive one of their embryos. So that's kind of the 64,000-foot view, but honing down a little bit closer to the ground, both males would do testing, including sperm analysis, genetic testing, and infectious disease testing, which is required by the FDA, before choosing an egg donor. And then once they've chosen an egg donor, an egg donor that they want to work with, because it's obviously a very personal choice among this couple, which egg donor or what they're looking for in terms of characteristics. Then once we have embryos created with their sperm and that egg donor's eggs, we would then work with them to seek out a gestational carrier. So that's the either same-sex male couple, or we do have a fair number of single males by choice. In terms of the same-sex female couple or single females by choice, we would just do routine testing, fertility testing on them to see how fertile they are, and so on and so forth, before we decide what sort of treatment we want to put them through or what sort of treatment they want to go through. When it's either a single woman by choice or a same-sex female couple, not all roads necessarily lead immediately to IVF, meaning they can do other less aggressive treatments if they so choose, let's say insemination or such like that, once they have figured out who their sperm donor is going to be. But it's sort of a standard battery of testing for both the men and the women going through treatment, mandated both by good clinical care and also by the FDA. So it's kind of a long-winded discussion of what you were asking.
Well, yeah, no, that was great. Thank you. But just for clarity, in order to get around the decision about whose genetics, when we're working with male partners, whose genetics we're going to use, you combine both of their sperm to fertilize, and then nobody really knows whose sperm it ends up being?
No, 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 no. So what we do is we take the eggs from the egg donor. It will be fertilized
Mhm.
50-50. So half the eggs will go with partner number one, male partner number one. Half the eggs will be fertilized with male partner number two. No, we track and we're required to, our embryologists are required to track the source, the sperm
Mm.
source and the egg source. That's required by the FDA and, embryology lab requirements. So no, it's not just that sperm gets mixed together with eggs and we don't know who's fertilizing what. And that's also very important too, simply because depending on where the surrogate or gestational carrier delivers the baby, there's going to need to be documentation that this baby was the product of an egg donor, excuse me, and which sperm source, because the woman delivering the baby has no genetic link to the baby. So therefore the birth certificate has to reflect that this child is the child of what we call the intended parents, not the one who gave birth to them. And each state has different rules and regulations, but all that requires very vigorous or well-documented processes.
That's interesting, and it makes sense. So I appreciate the clarity on that. So, will you share with me how your practice has evolved to really be able to support these LGBTQ families in pursuing their family?
Well, I think number one, it's evolved through the experience of working with LGBTQ plus community and parents simply over the years, working along with the advances in care to the LGBTQ community in the sense of, 20 years ago, this was a very uncommon sort of treatment, but as time has evolved, it's become more common. And with that, and with the number of patients we've worked with, we've helped to hone what we're offering to them emotionally and medically, obviously, but also supporting them logistically and emotionally over the years. Now, one of the things we take pride with here at New England Fertility is that each patient, each couple will have a identified coordinator who will work with them from the beginning of the process to the end of the process till they leave our practice or their gestational carrier leaves our practice pregnant. Our coordinators basically really get to know these couples and vice versa. And so they can all share in the excitement of, a success, so to speak. But also it's important simply because it is a very complicated, logistically complicated process, and each couple's journey is slightly different. So therefore, we want the coordinator who works with them from the very beginning to know this couple, number one, as human beings, and number not just as patients, but also know their particular stories. I always find it's great to know particular stories for all our patients. So we do, once again, provide them a coordinator, and that coordinator also facilitates um, updates to the couple during the medical screening process, during the IVF process, let's say for a same sex male couple, when the donor is going through her process to produce eggs. And she updates everybody when the gestational carrier is in cycle, and so on and so forth. So it's a big loop of people that is sort of guided by the coordinator. And we feel that facilitates good communication because, my experience over the last 30 years in dealing with all patients trying to start a family through assisted reproductive technologies, that there's just a lot of stress with the waiting, the not knowing. And I think the more communication that we have, hopefully decreases their stress level because they understand what the process is. They understand as they're going through it, and they're not just dealing with somebody who has very little experience or expertise, especially working with egg donors and gestational carriers. What I frequently say to couples, when they're sort of shopping around, why should we come to New England Fertility or why should we go elsewhere? What I tell them is that for a lot of LGBTQ couples, especially same-sex male couples using an egg donor and gestational carrier, if you're at a large fertility practice, you're just going to be a small subset of that whole practice. So the follow-up and the guidance you get is just going to be lumped in with, heterosexual couples going through treatment. And we believe here that, there are unique characteristics are couples using egg donors and gestational carriers.
And what would you say some of those unique characteristics are?
Well, I would say number one, the emotionality around doing this. That's number one. Number two, these are not couples that have an infertility issue. So I always say to couples, there's nothing, as opposed to a couple who's grappling with infertility, one doesn't want to sort of pathologize what our couples are going through because it's not that they have an infertility issue. So I think just in the way you speak with them and support them has a lot to do with, making them feel like they're organically being well taken care of. Also, the nuances of working with gestational carriers in terms of having them have a successful outcome. So if you have a practice that's not very experienced working with gestational carriers, I think that can reflect in that the medical care might not be as optimal as it could be. So I think it's the experience of working with gestational carriers and the medical nuances of their cycle that requires a level of experience in terms of working with the gestational carriers.
That's interesting. Would you mind walking us through that process of what that looks like through the IVF process?
If it's a same-sex male couple, we'll work with them to identify an egg donor. That egg donor will be matched with them. And then that egg donor goes through an IVF cycle where she takes hormones to stimulate her ovaries to produce multiple eggs, just like any other woman doing IVF. She will then have those eggs retrieved or extracted during the procedure in our office. All the eggs that are extracted will then be fertilized with the male couple's sperm in a 50-50 split, if that's what they so desire. Obviously we get their input. Do they want to fertilize half eggs with each partner's sperm? Some couples will say one of the men in the couple isn't interested in being a biologic father, so all the eggs will be fertilized with the other partner's sperm. And there are nuances to that decision too. And once again, these are very personal decisions that sort of are intra-couple decided. So they make their decisions based on what they see their family being as a couple, as a family. So the egg donor's eggs have been extracted and fertilized. Embryos are created. Those embryos are then allowed to grow in our incubators or our lab for up to 7 days. We advocate doing chromosomal screening or testing on the embryos, so we know which embryos are chromosomally normal and good to transfer into a gestational carrier, and which embryos are chromosomally abnormal and therefore not appropriate to transfer back into a gestational carrier. Those embryos are then frozen. Why is that? Well, that's simply because it's going to now take time for this couple to seek out a gestational carrier and be partnered with a gestational carrier. And for that, they would go to an outside agency. We do not provide gestational carriers. So there are many outside agencies that will provide gestational carriers. And the couple will meet with that agency. That agency will partner them up with a gestational carrier. And then once that's all been dealt with, we bring the gestational carrier in for medical screening here at New England Fertility to make sure we agree that this is an appropriate person who can safely carry their baby, their pregnancy. Once she's passed medical screening, we will then work with her to determine when her period is going to come. We will then start the treatment cycle. And what does that involve? That involves monitoring her uterus and transferring one of their embryos in at the appropriate time. We thaw an embryo and we transfer it. We put it into her uterus with a catheter or a straw. And normally when a gestational carrier is going through monitoring and treatment, we usually transfer the embryo in around mid-cycle days, more like actually day 21 to day 26, which is normally in nature when a fertilized embryo would implant after, intercourse in nature. So we're trying, and this is standard therapy throughout the reproductive medicine community. So this is nothing unique. We're fortunate because the gestational carriers have carried pregnancies before, which is all part of the requirements to be a gestational carrier. They have very good rates of success when we put in a chromosomally normal embryo.
Thank you for that clarification. What do you think the intended parent should look for when they're choosing a surrogacy agency?
Sure. Well, I think they will do their due diligence in terms of assessing the quality of the gestational carriers that the agency has. Does the agency provide legal support? Obviously, the gestational carrier needs to have contracts and legal contracts, as do the intended parents who are going to be working with that gestational carrier. And then for some couples, it's important. Cost is a factor, and how quickly a gestational carrier can be partnered with them. And each agency has a different timeline. And then what has been the success of that agency with partnering couples with a gestational carrier, and then the success rates, the probability that the gestational carriers that they're offering to patients have a high probability of getting pregnant. So those are all the things that would be part, I assume, of the initial interview with the surrogacy agency and the intended parent couple.
Great. Thank you so much. I want to shift gears just a little bit. Can you share with me why you do what you do?
I mean, I've been a fertility specialist for almost 30 years now, and obviously as part of my background as a OBGYN and a subspecialty trained reproductive medicine physician, my goal is to help all patients conceive and build families of their choice. So that's been my mantra since 1995, actually. Yeah. So that's what brought me into reproductive medicine.
Since 1995. So you've seen a lot of changes through the years.
I have, especially in treatment for the LGBTQ community using egg donors and gestational carriers. Absolutely.
What do you think is most misunderstood about this process, the whole process from surrogacy to the IVF for this community?
Well, I think what's been misunderstood is it is a complex process, but it's not so complex as to be daunting or unaccomplishable. And the success rates are very high. And I think, but what I also find is important is that not all couples want to do this process. So I think it's very important for the couple to determine, is this the path they want to go down for starting a family? And some couples will have an initial consultation and decide, you know what, this is not the way we want to build our family. We will, move on to, let's say, fostering or adoption. So I think from the one side, it's great that this treatment is available and successful, but it's not one size fits all. And not every couple will say that this is for them. So I think that's the biggest misconception, that, it's either you have to do this to start a family, or on the flip side, it's not available to the general public. And also cost, this is definitely an expensive process, but what's happening now is, in a lot of situations, insurance is starting to reflect that they will cover some portions of this process. So it's contingent on the couple to determine, do they have insurance coverage? And that's another thing we here at New England Fertility will work with them even prior to their initial consultation to vet their insurance and let them know, do they have coverage through their company? If not, this is the out of pocket cost. We try and be very transparent about how much this is going to be before they even come in to see us.
Well, that's fantastic. So you do accept insurance because some clinics still don't.
Do it. It's all a matter of, do they have coverage?
Right, right. And that is expanding, which is so wonderful to see.
Right. Mhm. Absolutely.
Will you share with me a story that has inspired you or touched your heart?
I mean, it's hard for me to choose one story because, once again, I've been in this industry for so long. I think what's most touching to me is just the letters and the pictures I'll get once there's been delivery of a healthy child, either, for a same-sex female couple or a same-sex male couple, or even we have a small proportion. We have a proportion of, heterosexual couples with infertility, or single women by choice and single men by choice. So for me, it's just mostly getting those cards and letters after deliveries occurred, because, once we discharge them to their OB, they still have 8 months of pregnancy to get through safely. So that's really, it's hard to focus on, one sort of specific. Yeah, because, it's always great to get this email out of the blue with a lovely picture. I mean, I've just gotten two this past week, and I'm like, oh my gosh. Yeah. And so for me, helping them to start their families. And we're also fortunate here at New England Fertility. We also take care of a lot of international patients, international LGBTQ patients, where the country they may live in does not offer this therapy, this treatment for them. So we facilitate their being able to get their treatment done here at New England Fertility. So, and that's all part of our network that's in place.
I love that. It's so true. When we get those pictures, it's the best, right? It's just the best. One thing I've seen on this journey, really, it's not just about the logistics and the whole medical side, right? There's so many layers to it. There's that emotional, the financial, all the waiting, the unknowns, and all of this is really quite a process. And it's a big part of the work that I do with helping those couples move out of that stress loop, that anxiety, all that pressure. How do you support your patients when they're in that state?
I mean, just constant communication, constant reinforcement, making sure they know that the doctors are there for them. Their coordinator really facilitates just even a daily check in, so to speak, while they're going through their treatment, and just being able to support any anxieties that may come up. I find that a lot of patients will have a lot of anxiety overnight. So in the morning, we'll get an email that they were reading about this or that. And it's really just following up immediately and giving them the transparent information we can to help support them emotionally. And I think, all patients are very educated and intelligent nowadays, with the internet and the blogs. So from my perspective, I always say to them, they'll say, oh, you doctors must hate when we go on the internet or go on blogs. I say, absolutely not. You're going to tell me what you read, what your questions are, and I will either support what you read or refute what you read, and I will tell you why I less necessarily refute or agree with what you may have read on the blogs or on the internet. Part of my process of educating patients.
Yeah, that's great because there's so much that they're going through all the processes, all the different things. So I love that you have that. And I love that you have a special coordinator for them to really support them as well. That's fantastic. Okay, let's shift gears. I have a fun question. Share with me, if you can. I'm sure there's many, but what would the best advice you ever received? What would that be?
I think really just being empathetic to my patient's desire to build a family and just being empathetic to, their life goals. Because for a lot of the same sex male couples, especially in my generation or older, they never thought this was going to be an option for them. I, a lot of younger people, it's much more accepted because it's being done now. But for for a lot of men, they thought that once they decided to, come out or be in a relationship that this wouldn't be an option for them. Um, and once again, it is. So just being empathetic to the stress that they have as well.
I love that because I've seen, especially with seasoned doctors and nurses, that sometimes they'll become, I don't know, for lack of a better word, harsh, or they just want to, push them through. They don't really listen to them for whatever different reasons.
That is always a risk. And that's why we always have to step outside ourselves. And if the tables were turned, and if I was going through this, how would I feel and what would I want? And I think the days where doctors have to be completely hard and dispassionate in order to be good physicians are, I think, long over.
Hmm. I couldn't agree more. And especially with this journey being so emotional and really to be understood and empathetic on this journey makes such a huge difference. So it's really great that you make sure that you're conscious of that and you're aware of that. I love that. What would be one of the best compliments you've ever received?
I mean, thank you for helping us. That's really, I considered a multidisciplinary team approach. So, when I get a call or a card or a letter, thank you very much for making our dream come true and for supporting us. And then on the flip side, I may get a card or a letter. Things did not work out, but thank you very much for supporting us while we went through this journey.
Yeah, so really just getting that compliment of how you've helped them.
Exactly.
Okay, last fun question. How would your parents describe what you do for a living?
My parents, not here anymore, but they're very much the older generation. So I think, they basically would have described me helping people start families. I mean, I was born in the 60s. So, once again, it was in those days, the post-war days, the baby boom generation, people just had big families, large families. And then in those days, even for heterosexual couples, if you were not able to conceive, you usually went for adoption. But I think, I think I would just say that they, you know, uh, would probably say that I help people build families, which from their background, from their social and ethnic backgrounds was the most important thing for that generation. I mean, this was the war generation. So, their
Right.
goals are very much different. And, I think once again, we also have to be cognizant of a woman. And just in my role as a general fertility specialist, we're fortunate now in 2026 that women have the opportunity with various treatment protocols to delay family building until they are ready to pursue other avenues or aspects of their lives, or they just are not ready. So, there's fortunate that we also offer egg freezing here at New England Fertility, for women who aren't ready to build a family yet and want to have that opportunity in the future. So it's not like in the 1940s and 50s and 60s where people, and even the 70s and the 80s, where people were kind of hemmed in based on the quote biologic clock. It's a brave new world now for everyone.
Isn't that the truth? And it just keeps evolving so quickly.
It does. It absolutely does.
I love the options that we have nowadays to really be able to have a family. It's absolutely beautiful. And As far as egg preservation goes, when is the best time? I've seen a lot of women in their late 30s, like 38, 40, wanting to freeze eggs. But when would be the best time? And then what about, how do you handle the women that are over 35?
So the best time, I mean, it's whenever a woman decides she wants to do it. That's number one. So what I tell patients is in women who are mid 30s, early 40s, it becomes more difficult because your ovaries don't produce as many good quality eggs as they used to. So if I have a woman between 35 and 40, I'll say, "Well, you can certainly freeze your eggs, but you may need to do it more than once to get enough eggs in the freezer to boost the probability that when you thaw those eggs out, you have a good probability of a viable pregnancy." I advocate that young women talk about it when they go to see their gynecologist. So, starting in their mid 20s, not that they would necessarily do it then, but education of options is key to this whole process. Um, so I say the sooner the better. Under 35 is, quote, considered ideal, but once again, I think it's contingent on all general gynecologists or family practitioners who see women for their yearly exam to just bring up the subject and say, listen, there are tests we can do, a blood test to see what your egg reserve number is. You can take that information. You may not do anything with it, but it's important for you to know what your options are.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's really come such a long way. I remember when we first started doing egg freezing, because I've also been in this field for 25 years. And I just remember how it used to be, and it's really come a long way.
The new techniques of actually freezing and thawing the eggs over the last 12 to 15 years have advanced markedly, such that you're getting higher rates of egg survival when they're thawed out. So that's why we are allowed to offer to our patients for elective egg freezing.
Yeah. I love that. I love that for us. Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Ganacci. Is there anything that you would like to leave our audience with, a message or something you would like to share?
I think once again, for any couple, any patients, either within the LGBTQ community or not in the LGBT community, if you have questions or concerns, it never hurts to do a consult, televisit, virtual consult with a fertility specialist just to discuss. And, I think it's always knowledge is power. And I think that's what I would tell people. And it allows people to, once again, have the autonomy to make the decision they want to make once they have all the information.
Amazing. This was so helpful to walk us through this process because there's so much unknown and there's a lot of surprises. And it's really helpful to really just the way you unpacked it and broke it down for us so that we could see what's involved. I really appreciate that. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me today. You take care.
You too.